Hello everyone! It's been a while, but we're finally here. The 13th Doctor, played by Jodie Whittaker. And she's in the unique situation where she's the first Doctor to have had their entire run unfold whilst I've been talking about Doctor Who. I started off this series either just after or during the midst of her second season, and well, we're on to number 15 now, so to say the least, I've got some catching up to do. And I've got mixed opinions on this Doctor and the era as a whole. They very much broke the formula and took some risks, some of which I feel really worked, some of which didn't. But today we're going to be talking about all the good decisions, the smart changes, the breaths of fresh air that were brought to Doctor Who during this era. In my opinion at least, who am I to say what the best and worst episodes are? You, however, watching this video, I want to hear what all of you in the community think about how this era stands now that the dust has settled, so please let me know in the comments below what your favourite Jodie Whittaker stories are. I'd be genuinely interested in hearing. But before we go any further, I should add that for starters there will be spoilers for every single episode and basically every season that I talk about here, and I also want to give a big thank you to Veritaserum UK once again for these amazing fan-made episode trailers that they haven't done just for New Who but for the classic series as well. These trailers have really been a lifesaver due to the Content ID system on YouTube. So to give a little taster of what this footage looks like, here are some honourable mentions. Revolution of the Daleks, Kablam, and surprisingly, The Power of the Doctor. And with that all said and done, let's get into the top 5. First on the list, we have Village of the Angels, which is the fourth part of the Flux storyline, a story that I'm not particularly fond of, but I was impressed with how this episode is able to set itself apart from the rest of the Flux storyline. There's just a certain atmosphere for the majority of the episode that I feel is really akin to Blink, not just in the fact that Weeping Angels are in it, but also that it's very eerie, it's very handheld with the camera work, and at points this episode can be really creepy. Weeping Angels are actually scary again. They're following some previous rules with the Weeping Angels while still following the mythology of the Angels, which I really appreciated. Claire's premonitions of the Weeping Angels was a pretty cool concept, and the idea of angels being a transport prison thing is a strange idea that kind of works in the moment, but doesn't as soon as you start thinking about it. There are some very well-directed sequences involving the angels that apply a suitable amount of horror, using good sound design, some very nice handheld camera work. And there's an interesting mystery throughout the story. I love how they use time travel to solve some of these mysteries in a satisfying way. But unfortunately, I don't really care for the overarching Flux story, nor did I care for the parts featuring Belle, which didn't at all feel like they fit in this story, so that does weigh down my enjoyment of this episode quite a bit. But at least the angel stuff was cool, and the cliffhanger, whilst resulting in a fairly unsatisfying ending, was still a pretty cool cliffhanger to end the episode on. This episode brought back the Weeping Angels in a fresh way, whilst having a really good atmosphere and a solid mystery to go through it. And whilst it's a story with limitations due to the overarching Flux plotline, it's still very engaging, which is what warranted its spot on this list. Can You Hear Me is probably the most underrated 13th Doctor story. Generally when people talk about their favourite episodes, I never see this episode brought up, which is strange because I really like how this story explored the companions and actually developed them and their lives surrounding the Doctor. We see bits of Yaz's past, we see Graham's cancer feared and Ryan's friend's mental health issues, and they all face realistic problems, and seeing how they've changed across the course of the show is very interesting to me. The villains were very unique conceptually. Kevin Lannister is brilliant at playing this godlike Dream Lord who plays games with humans, and the concept of these villains was genuinely scary and also pretty intimidating. We got a nice Celestial Toymaker reference from Kevin. We also got visions of the Orphan 55 monsters, which was kind of hilarious. And like I said, this plot is genuinely scary at points. The direction was really good, the music and sound, it all lends itself into a really great atmosphere for the episode. The plot is very good too, the whole thing being essentially a trap for the Doctor, which made for a really good plot twist. But this episode still had some very slow pacing, which I liked for the most part. I like it's slowing down to spend time with its characters. But unfortunately, the side effect of this is that the conclusion feels very rushed, which is a shame because all of the build-up leading to the point, great. One other issue I have with this episode is a scene towards the end of the episode that honestly gives me one of my least favourite 13th Doctor moments.
I should say a reassuring thing now, shouldn't I?
Yeah, probably.
I'm still quite socially awkward. So I'm just going to subtly walk towards the console and look at something. And then, in a minute, I'll think of something that I should have said that might have been helpful.
Okay. Well, I'm glad we had this chat, eh? Yeah.
This moment doesn't work at all for me. For starters, it isn't funny, but also it paints out the Doctor like she doesn't care at all and isn't trying to care really. I also think that the dialogue of her saying, "I'm a bit socially awkward," is very on the nose, which is annoying because earlier on in the episode we see that she clearly does have an attachment to her companions. When she's in Aleppo, we can see that she's still talking to them and she clearly misses them across the episode, but this scene does so much to try and destroy that with just trying to make a stupid joke. It doesn't work here. But that one moment aside, this episode took a lot of risks. A lot of them paid off, and I liked it. Breaking into the top 3, we have Praxeus. The concept of an alien epidemic was a unique enough premise, but the deeper messages made the story far more interesting to me. An alien race on the verge of extinction using Earth as a petri dish to try and find a cure, knowingly releasing it because of all of the microplastics on the planet. This is really interesting stuff, and it's not too preachy, which felt very refreshing. The episode moves at a breakneck pace, many characters and plot lines are all coming together, and they come together pretty well, like a sort of web of stuff that all links together nicely, and because of that we have a lot of smaller moments for all of its characters. Each of the companions gets some nice little moments for them, and the side characters made for a pretty interesting ensemble. Some characters are definitely better than the others, but my standout for me was Jake, where I really enjoyed his mini arc in this episode, and I'm glad that there was a happy ending to it. On the opposite end of the spectrum, I find it kind of funny and kind of sad how nobody acknowledges Aramu's death. As a side tangent, I found out that he died less than a year after this episode release, which kind of ruined my day, RIP. But there was a very big human element to this story, and it felt Doctor light at points. Although the moments featuring the Doctor and the companions were very nice too. I feel like Suki could have done with a little more screen time, as she plays a pretty big role in the story. And whilst I understand her motivation, I feel like there just needed to be a little bit more development there, although there was a very satisfying death as a result of it. But onto the more technical aspects, the direction was great, the cinematography was brilliant, the camera work was very creative at points, the effects and the sound of the Praxeus virus were really good as well, and it gives this episode a very distinctive look. The episode didn't have as much depth as I'd have liked, but I was still very invested in the story, and it felt well worth it. A for effort and A for creativity. At number 2, we have War of the Sontarans, and as I said before, I didn't really like the Flux storyline as a whole, but I have to admit that this episode is a diamond in the rough, where it uses the Flux storyline as a blank canvas to tell its own story, and it does this very well. For the most part, War of the Sontarans might as well be its own standalone adventure because it feels so separate from the rest of Flux. A temporal pincer resulting in Sontarans invading the Crimea and Liverpool, giving us a nice mix of old and new. It's a pretty cool concept. For starters, this episode looks fantastic with some excellent cinematography, some great production design and some pretty good direction too. The battle sequence midway through looks brilliant. Mary Seacole made for a really cool one-off companion. I think that Sarah Powell gives a really good performance, and I love how her personality differs from most other side characters we get in the show. This episode saw the big return of the Sontarans, and as a whole they were a great villain. They're genuinely threatening again, and they have a good mix of levity and comedy, where they're definitely reinforcing that these are aliens bred for war, but they're able to use that as a backbone to then give us some pretty cool humour featuring the Sontarans. In terms of the designs and the makeup, they look great too, and this is probably the best that the Sontarans have ever looked across the entire show. The idea of a temporal pincer is a pretty cool concept, and it lends itself to add some very nice historical elements while still linking with the modern day part of Flux. And because of this we end up in Liverpool again. Dan's plotline was actually pretty fun this episode, and his moments with Carbonista were great. I'm not a huge fan of the Yasvinda subplot in this episode. It feels largely unrelated, mainly a byproduct of it having to be linked to the Flux story. And kind of like with Village of Angels, it just doesn't feel like it fits into this story at all. But ignoring all of that, we have a great looking episode that's surprisingly funny while still having big ramifications on the plot. War of the Sontarans feels fresh, energetic, but most importantly, it feels like Doctor Who, which is what gets it to the number 2 spot. And my favourite 13th Doctor story is Demons of the Punjab, which is probably a surprising one here. I certainly wasn't expecting this one to come up at number 1, but the more I thought about this story, the more it grew on me. For starters, this is probably the closest to a pure historical we've had thus far in all of New Who, and it's motivated not by the usual tropes that we've seen in Doctor Who, but instead from curiosity and family. The characters find themselves here because Yaz wants to learn more about her grandmother, and because of this, it's probably the most emotionally resonant episode of the Whittaker era, where we focus on the people, how love brought them together, and how the partition tore them apart. The reveal of the Thijarians just being there to witness death I thought was a brilliant subversion of expectations, and had a surprising amount of depth actually. As a period piece, this episode looks great. It's got some phenomenal cinematography, some really good production design, and some really great music as well that leans into the period that it's setting. I also think the sound design is great, especially linked with the Thijarians. The reveal of the brother being the villain is a very interesting plot twist, and learning that Prem is destined to die made for a great twist as well, and the Doctor is forced to do absolutely nothing. With that, the wedding scene is very heartfelt, and the Doctor's speech he gives is excellent. I actually think that this might be one of my favourite 13th Doctor moments. I even found that the final scene of Yaz speaking to her grandmother is surprisingly emotional, and it's a really great point to end the episode with. Overall, this is a great episode because it doesn't rely on the typical tropes of Doctor Who, and instead uses its characters to motivate everything. The performances are great, the story is intriguing and submersive, it's got a good pace, and I love the themes shown across the episode. It's very deep emotionally, and because of this, I think it's my favourite 13th Doctor story. And there's my top 5. Thank you all for watching. Did you agree, disagree with this video? Let me know in the comments below. And of course this means that I'll inevitably be working on a top 5 worst of the 13th Doctor video, as well as a few other projects in the pipeline, so make sure to subscribe for those when they come out. But until then, thank you everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, be sure to subscribe, like and comment. I've been Mr. Chicken Movies, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Goodbye.